Well, happy Wednesday, everybody. Welcome to episode 4 of my podcast, Leaders in Safety. June and July is all about my guests having a global theme. I've got some really interesting guests lined up over the next couple of weeks. I have somebody who's based in Paris. She's held a variety of roles around the world in senior safety positions with an energy company. I have another fantastic individual based out of South Africa. Her company has a remit of 112,000 staff on the African continent. So fascinating to hear her stories from a safety perspective. And also have another person joining us who works for a big Swiss company who has a global role, but based out of Sydney, which is a bit similar to my next guest. I'd like to welcome, I'm excited about having Andrew Morrison on. Andrew Morrison is the Global Head of Health, Safety, Security and Environment at Cushman Wakefield. Welcome, Andy.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for the opportunity. And call me Andy. It's normally Andrew if I'm in trouble, so let's get to Andy.
I don't want you in trouble on my podcast, so I'm going to absolutely go with Andy. And I noticed, Andy, that Victorians, us down here in Melbourne, are trying to get rid of that COVID plague, and it looks like New South Wales has got some numbers up there. How are things looking at the moment?
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. The government here tries to take a pragmatic approach to it, which we're all thankful for. I mentioned to you off camera that my daughter's getting married this weekend, so the family's a tad nervous as to what restrictions may or may not come into play during the week. I think the bride-to-be is exceptionally nervous, but fingers crossed we get it to go without a hitch.
Well, we wish you all the best of luck. I'm sure you're going to be very, very fine with next weekend, and there won't be any COVID-related issues on stopping that wedding. But no, nice to have you, Andy, and I really appreciate you coming on board to be my guest on episode 4. I wanted to kick off with what I've just found really interesting. You work for a $8 billion company. It's got over 50,000 staff. It's got, I think, over 400 offices in 70 countries, and you hold a global role based out of Sydney. Tell us what that's like.
Not boring and interesting. So it's what the interesting thing for me is that I come through UGL into DTZ across into Cushman Wakefield. So for me, it's been like a seamless transition into this new role. The difference being on the early days, UGL DTZ, the head office was in Sydney. So it's completely flipped for me. So I'm having to experience the other side of that. But I suppose it doesn't matter where you are. If you have a global role, there's always going to be a part of the world that's not in your time zone. So you just have to deal with that. And it's not that difficult, actually, when you work out process and you work out times and you work out who your key stakeholders are, where they are, you can do it reasonably easy without losing too much sleep. And I need all the beauty sleep I can get, so it's important. I think the other thing, based in having a role based in Sydney when your head office is in the US, is you bring a different perspective. If the whole leadership team is sitting in the US, you tend to have a focus that doesn't go outside of that border. Not on purpose, but it's just because that's where you are, and that's the situations that you're dealing with, but what's real and relevant in real time to you. So those of us that are outside of that home base, if you like, help balance the views and policy, which is good.
I'm recruiting a role at the moment, actually, which is based in Asia. It's a very senior safety role, and one of the things that the client talks about a bit is those differences from a cultural perspective in terms of different countries, different levels of technical capability, just cultural capability. When it comes to safety, you've got 70 countries. Out of interest, like, how easy is it to adapt from one to the other when you're trying to talk about a certain topic and getting everybody on board when everybody's so different in terms of where they're at from a safety perspective?
I'd like to be able to say easy, but that would be lying. But it's not, if you pitch it at the right level and you accept that things aren't the same, and you need to get comfortable managing in that grayness where things aren't the same. The difficulties come when there's pros and cons to having large global clients that expect certain standards. And the pros for that is you know what the rules are and you know what you're trying to manage to. The cons are, the reality is that expectation doesn't always line up in certain parts of the world, and even within their own organizations, they're not able to live up to those expectations. So that's difficult. But the plus side to that is over a period of time, that expectation from that sort of global client group does start to slowly elevate the understanding, expectation, education within certain countries. Some a lot faster than others, and that's just the way it is. But I think if you keep it relevant, you keep it real, and you tailor it so it is doable for somebody to be able to achieve those expectations to the best of their ability, given the culture and the complexity of the maturity of the market that they're working in. It's doable. It's not always the Rolls-Royce solution, but sometimes you only need a Holden to get you from point A to point B safely.
No, absolutely. Yeah, no. And you touched on UGL. You know, UGL being traditionally a big sort of end-to-end asset solutions provider, Cushman Wakefield as a commercial services provider. What are the differences? I mean, you've talked about the transition being not too bad. Were there many sort of similarities, or there's some difference when it comes to, because with UGL, obviously you've got a lot of technical people, their skill sets are quite different versus a lot of the brokers, etc. What were some of those differences that you found, and how did you adapt to that?
Well, surprisingly enough, there was a lot more similarities and differences. We do a lot of work in the technical area. Our integrated facility management teams, our property management teams, project design teams, we do a lot of work maintaining facilities for different organizations around the world. We do a lot of work in oil and gas, hospitals, prisons, airports, large sporting complexes. So you can, by that description, you can see that there's a lot of complexity. We need to get in and maintain work with organizations that are managing their business in a high-risk environment. So we have a lot of technical people still within our business. We also manage project management on behalf of the client, large construction projects, and very large, some very large projects in places like India, which make the complexities of that. So my previous history has come in handy to understand all of that and support the business.
And when it comes to staff, you know, different regions are at certain or different levels when it comes to education, skill base. You know, I think, you know, in Australia, I think there is quite a good pool of candidates when it comes to searching and trying to get a real range of different talents when you're looking to shortlist a role. It's quite a good candidate pool here in Australia. Would you say that there are other regions that are more challenging than others when it comes to trying to find talent to bolster those different regions for your business?
Absolutely. We've been lucky. I've been lucky, personally been lucky right through UGL into transition. We haven't had a large changeover, a large turnover. So a lot of the people that were working with me in previously have transitioned over and are still working with me, which is good. But yeah, the pond is smaller. There's not as much fish in the pond, if you to use an example. But you find that there are diamonds in the rough. There are people that are quite capable. Education systems in many of the developing world are producing very capable people that understand what needs to be done and how it needs to be done, as good as it's being done in the Western world. So difficult, yes. Impossible, no.
No, that's good to hear. Before COVID happened, how was your travel schedule? Did you find that you were traveling a lot and COVID has changed that, or has it always been everything's possible via video conference?
No. This is the longest I've been at home since, I don't know, couldn't even tell you, probably 15, 20 years. The good thing is my wife and I are still married, so that hasn't affected that too badly. But yeah, it has affected from that perspective. Adapting to technology has been a necessity. We've done that to the best of our ability. It's not the same as being in front of people. I find a lot of the cultures are more responsive when you're able to get in front of them, work with them. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to that interaction again. But yeah, my schedule is completely different to what it was. And I'm hoping it gets back to a happy medium somewhere in the middle. I think we've all learned that maybe we're too dependent on travel, and we can do more remotely. But there will always be, the need to travel,
What?
especially now.
No, thanks, Andy. What over your career journey, what have you seen as being the biggest positive change in the work health and safety sector?
Interesting question. It's probably something I could talk on for 3 or 4 days, but two of the things that strike out, and I was talking to somebody about this the other day, is that the education systems, and granted they're different and not all the same, but the education system seem to be educating the generations a lot better in terms of what this thing is, but what is this thing called safety? And their expectations are different, and what they expect out of the workplace is different. So you're getting these people coming into the workplace with a more open mind and more willing to work with you, more understanding of what you're trying to do to manage risk, more understanding that safety is not hard hats and band-aids and first aid boxes. It's about managing risk and profitability and their longevity within an organization. And they want that to be a certain way. They want to feel safe, but they also want their views to be considered, and they want to be part of that decision-making process, which is great. The other positive I've seen is something that I mentioned before, is that the expectations around the world from big clients, governments, and investors are changing, and have been changing, and that change is more rapid. And they want to work with or invest in organizations that do this better than others. They don't want their name associated with people that hurt their employees, hurt others, destroy the environment, the brand name, profitability, productivity, all of that sort of stuff that we all know and love. I mean, that's more real.
And yeah, I also like to flip it and sort of also ask what frustrates you the most. Sometimes it's a bit of a pointy question, but is there something that you see today that you think, why are we still doing that? Aren't we better than that? Or what should we be striving more for?
Yep. What really frustrates me the most is the fact that despite the rhetoric, a lot of contracts, large projects are won by somebody looking at the bottom right-hand corner rather than understanding the complexities and what has been provided for and proposed to manage the risk. Even a lot of governments, organizations, large organizations, despite what they say, still carry a lot more weight in the bottom right-hand corner, are prepared to award work to somebody who's going to do it cheaper and try and work through the circumstances that may bring down the track. There prepared to work with that, which is frustrating. And
yeah,
the yes,
I can imagine.
There still remains a yes but culture, where organizations are outwardly speaking about their commitment, but when it comes to the nitty-gritty, yes, we're committed to safety, but that's still frustrating.
I've asked a number of my guests over the last couple of weeks about building teams and the people that they have around them, because obviously you're only as good as the people that support you, report into you, or your broader team. You in your role, it's a bit obviously that added complexity of those people will be based in various places around the world. So if you hold a senior role in Australia and your business is very Australia centric, you can form very strong relationships and get to know those people very well. How does that go in your role? How do you go about building teams and developing and maintaining that talent, given where you're based and the size of your business?
Trust. I learned a long time ago. I think I've got scars that I carry, and I've probably scarred others as I've learned along the way. But you need to trust the recruitment process that you go through. Trust that you've got it right, and once people are in place, give them the freedom the autonomy to be able to do what you ask them to do. That then translates or transfers itself through the organisation into their teams, and not micromanaging people, not delving down into the weeds, not trying to get involved in everything. Is sometimes it's a easy thing to do when you're trying to manage in smaller markets and you're worried about what's going on in places that are not as mature and the legal frameworks are different. But you've got to stand back and trust that the organisation, not just the safety organisation, the organisation's ability or want to manage the risk. And you have to jump in from time to time, and sometimes you have to have the hard conversations, but you've got to recognise when people do it right, encourage people to continue to do it right, reward people for doing it right, highlight those that are committed to it, those that are having wins, highlight that throughout the organisation and make sure praise gets to the right people and the right people get recognised and rewarded for the effort.
You must be looking forward to, when COVID finishes, to be able to get on a plane and go see those people again. I'm assuming you've probably even hired some people that you've never met before in person.
Yeah, I have. Recently, we've just hired into the US a senior executive to look after a very large portion of our American business. And it's difficult to do that remotely and trying to manage, provide him the support. Thankfully, our organisation is such that he can get the support from others, but it's not, I definitely want to be able to get it across to the US and just go and shake the hand of the people that are working so hard for us through COVID. People have gone over and above in so many locations in so many ways. Just to look them square in the eye, shake their hand, buy them a beer, buy them a meal, and say thank you is something that's important to me.
On last week's episode with Brian Long from Woolworths, we were talking about influencing and the time that he spends in his overall role on just the influencing part, not just the influencing, but also developing his team on how to go about influencing. When it comes to your role, obviously given the global context, your position, there are so many different stakeholders at the Cushman and Wakefield sort of empire. What are some of the sort of top tricks and tips that you have for people when it comes to how to best influence the whole sort of boardroom down to the shop floor?
Relationships are key. You need to build relationships at every level of the organisation. In many ways, you're an internal consultant, salesman, confidant, sometimes mum or dad, depending on who you're talking to. So you need to build those relationships. You need to be true to yourself. You need to be who you are, not who you think the organisation wants you to be. You've got to have the position your position in life and in the organisation for a reason, because you do things a certain way, and you will continue to develop. But you need to be true to yourself and do it your way, not other people's way. You need to remain relevant and on topic. I think if you run around as a safety professional, run around doing the old skies falling stuff, you're certainly going to lose credibility pretty quickly. And align yourself as far as practical to the goals of the individuals as much as the organisation. So understand what are the things that they're trying to achieve, what are the obstacles for them, and work with them to be able to deliver on what's important to them by managing what I term loosely operational risk, which is what we try to do in the safety world. Sometimes the word safety can damage it, can damage the relationship because it's perceived as here comes the guy with the anchor. Yeah. He's going to slow us down rather than the guy that's going to help pull us through. So, that's the sort of language I really encourage people in our organisation to use and to put their arm around the leaders and understand where they are, what their experiences are, why they think of things the way they do, instead about trying to change that in a constructive way, notwithstanding the fact that that's many times there's going to be the need for a hard conversation, but hard conversations can be had with banking in certain ways, and can still be a productive conversation.
Do you find there's much difference when, you talked about the mindset, and when people sort of think, oh, here comes Andy, something's gone wrong, or what have I done, or things like that. Is there much of a difference when it comes to when you're influencing and trying to maybe roll a strategic program out, when it comes to the front line people of the organization versus the back office? Is there much difference between those two groups within the overall organization?
Yes, and it's different in different countries. But in Australia, Australians are, as our Americans in our company work out, Australians obviously tell you what they think pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So you don't need to stick your toe in the water too far to find out what the temperature is. So if you're doing it in Australia, you've got to be real and relevant. You can't be fluffy. Working out of a textbook is understandable. You get theory, you get process, you learn a lot of things out of a textbook, but you don't learn life's experiences. So you've got to get in with the guys that are doing the job and understand who they are, what they're there for, what their issues are. Don't sugarcoat it. Don't make it try to be more special than it needs to be. Keep it relevant, keep it real, keep it consistent.
Yeah, no, very, very, very good advice. And I think, specifically wanting to know what their pain points are, and because someone that's in finance, who's in IT versus sales versus marketing versus legal, I mean, everyone's got a different perspective on the business. So you've been there for 8 years now. What would be the most rewarding part of your job since you've been at Cushman Wakefield?
I'll use COVID probably because it's still fresh, but as you know, COVID started in China, and we have a large business in China. So we had to spring into action pretty quickly while the rest of the world learned what this thing was. And the goalposts moved quickly, as they have continued to do over the last 12 months, and still do. We're still learning on a daily basis. But what's so rewarding for me is that the organization came together in a way that it would probably never have done without COVID. We learned so many things about ourselves as a business. We were able to respond quickly. We were able to not just respond quickly, we were able to form support groups. We were able to reach out and tap into expertise that was available to us. It wasn't just something that the safety guys had to look after. It was a business problem. We developed very early on protocols for ourselves, and then we worked from that as a base and put together return to work, return to office protocols to give out to our client base that was very well received. And we've continued to develop and update that. And my teams around the world, the people that work in the HSSE, were key in helping deliver those messages, support the people that are working on client sites, support the clients. The HR team has been right beside us, if not in front of us, in many times, developing policy, supporting families. We've been able to put funds together to support those that have been most financially affected. We've found ways to import materials, oxygen concentrators. We've found ways to help people get access to vaccines where it's not necessarily been easy to get to. And our global supply team, our global procurement team, has partnered with other parts of the business to make that happen. And when there was an abundance of stuff in one country, we tried to be able to share that around. So I'm extremely proud of the organisation and what it's been able to do in a very nimble but efficient way to manage COVID. And I hope on the back of that, we've learnt something, that we're able to, assemble the right groups of people to manage challenges in an effective way, and continue to do that as we move forward.
If we were to be talking to those people who are currently in middle management, senior management roles, they're aspiring to be a general manager, they're aspiring to maybe have a global remit or something like that, what single bit of advice have you got for those people wanting to aspire to that level?
I think it rolls back into some of the things I've already spoken about understand who you are, understand what value you bring, but really tap into the organization. If you really need to understand what is the organization, what does it want to be, what does it value, how does that line up with my values, and work from there and helping them develop the strategies. I'm going to call it personal brand, but your internal personal brand. So what you stand for, how you fit into the bigger picture, and how you can be of value to the organization to meet those goals and objectives. How are you going to help the organization get there? How are you going to help the individuals? How are you going to help those individuals come together to be an effective fighting unit, so on and so forth.
No, good, Andy. Thank you for that advice, and thank you for being on. I mean, I find it really interesting to have a chat with someone who has got such an interesting position in such a large organization. Now, there are a number of people. There's not a lot of people, but there are a few people who have got global remits based in Australia, but for international companies. And those insights, those examples that you've given us, I really do appreciate. And on a more personal note, I wish you all the best of luck with next weekend. I hope all is well with your daughter having her wedding, and best of luck with that. Congratulations. But thank you so much for being on my podcast. And I really appreciate all the bits of information you've shared with our audience today.
Thanks for the invite, and I look forward to seeing all the other podcasts you do. It's always it's interesting to see how others tackle their challenges.
Absolutely. No, fantastic, Andy. Thanks again, and all the best, and have a great week.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Andy.